Hi there, my name is Marcus Ayers. I live in Edmond, Oklahoma, and this video is being put together for the Yard to Yard project. I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing. This yard has been pesticide free for at least 4 years. Before that, the only pesticide I used was a pre-emergent to try to get rid of those nasty little stickers. Since then, I've not gotten rid of them, but I just sort of tolerate them, and they're sort of quarantined to those sections of the yard. I'll share a little bit about myself. By trade, I'm a licensed therapist with a little side project called the Red Earth Wellness Collective. Part of that collective is doing this very thing, and so I'm really thrilled to be able to share what I've been doing with my own yard, which is a part of a larger goal and collective of folks that want to do it with their own yards and perhaps sort of spread this as far as we can. This area here has become the Compost Station. Right here is the kind of the heart or the beginning of the compost collection system here. We collect compost from inside of the house and we throw it in that little bin there. And I mix it in each time with some leaves and some green grass and just sort of do a lasagna type of layering. It's been a while since I've timed it right, but I've placed this on top of a pail to catch water as the rain runs through it. And usually I'll try within a couple of days after the rain to pull that pail out and to put it on the plants. As I understand it, it's a sort of a compost tea of sorts, because as the rainwater just soaks through that compost, it picks up the organic material from the compost, puts it in the bucket down below, and you let it sit for a day or two and then water your plants. If you let it go past that, it loses its nutritious content and or it goes bad. This right here I acquired this year through the city of Edmond. It is a compost rotator. The plan for this is to be a worm compost station. Hibiscus tree is a good example of the use of organic compost from our yard that we've got going. When I acquired this about 2 months ago, we had it for about 3 to 4 weeks and it produced like just maybe a couple of weak blooms. So I added some compost to this, and actually potted it for the first time, so that might have impacted it as well. So, but between potting it, adding a batch of compost, and I think one dose of compost tea, here we have a beautiful flowering hibiscus tree. This is an area of the yard that I have blown leaves into for quite a number of years, and it's created leaf mold in this area. And actually this section right here I have dug up to use in my new planters, but from kind of here on has been several years worth of leaf mold buildup. Back here in this part of the yard are a few compostable materials from the yard. This is a mostly green or grass pile. This here is a long-term leaf mold pile, as well as this bin, which you can see is already broken down since spring. That was full of leaves, and so it's turning into a nice leaf mold compost pile. Here are a couple of piles of branches that are ready for the wood chipper once I rent one of those. And this is a burn pile that I've had that has been metal free since I started it. And I don't yet use the ash in composting because I don't really know sort of how that fits in yet. Another angle of the front yard. So I do use a riding lawnmower. I'm not totally pleased with how quickly it runs out of gas, and I'd love to learn more about how to extend the gas mileage of my lawnmower. I've kind of been looking into that. I don't catch it. In fact, early in the season, in the spring season, this grass really grows up really thick. And so not only does it kind of drop down into this front yard, but I've had a couple of really good piles of fescue grass that I can just collect and put near the compost pile to just add as needed. Here is an example of shrubs that I have found to be drought resistant, or at least to do well in this area. Some of these I don't really know the names of, but this here, this little cluster here, this little guy on the end, hosta, which is something's been eating it, but that was donated to me by a friend. This part of the yard is a good place, I think, to talk about some sustainable ground cover that I found that works. And I don't know the names of any of these except for this English ivy. We've got English ivy growing up the wall, and a little bit over here, as I'll show you in a second. I don't know what that is, but that's coming up every year. And then this ground cover is ground cover that I've found to do really well. Not require a whole lot of water, and it spreads really well, and it's pretty. It gets the job done. Here it is, taking over this little section with a little sunflower coming up there. And then here is a larger cluster of English ivy that I've just let take over this whole area as a ground covering. This is another area to talk about sustainable, drought tolerant ground cover or vegetation. Again, names, I've not done my research, but this does well. It's kind of taken over this little corner. And then this Mexican heather is something that I've used several different places. This here, I'm actually going to replant some of these, so these others will kind of get a little bigger, and I can use the others in different areas of the yard. I do have some sage here and some lavender. Can't remember if that's lavender. It's a different kind of lavender that definitely has a beautiful smell. Wanted to talk a little bit about irrigation. We have a aerobic septic system. There are two heads connected to it, and they both water the front yard. One is here in the kind of the middle of the yard. That's what's shown here. Another is in this cluster of grass that I've allowed to grow, and I'm actually hoping to possibly turn this into a little garden and turn that sprinkler head into a drip irrigation head. But I've let this cluster of grass grow to maybe let it be a cover crop of sorts, or if I need to plant a new cover crop this fall, I'll do that. Over here, so this is our front yard, but the benefit of being able to experiment with all of this is that we actually sit behind someone, and so that's a lane that comes down to our house. So that creates really the ability for me to do whatever I want in our yard and for nobody to really care. But over here in the front yard, I've got another little section that I let grow, little sun exposed section. But up until a couple of years ago, I mowed this whole front yard, and I mowed our whole backyard. But the last couple of years, I've intentionally allowed some of these other areas to just grow naturally. This section of the yard I seed every year with fescue, and I mow it on its highest setting, and it's really one of the largest areas that I mow. between this area of the front yard, the back area, and then the lane, and then this little island here. Those are the only places that I mow. Our water here is from a well. This is the one water spigot for the entire yard. For as far as watering the yard, we have no formal irrigation system other than the aerobic water system connected to the septic tank, which only waters this front yard with 2 spigots. Anything else that I'm watering with either rainwater or through this water spigot, which I've got a line that goes to that side of the house, a line that goes to this side of the house. There are just 3 areas that I'll water with a water sprinkler once a week. This is one of them, this is another, and then that island over there. This is the main area where I have focused on collecting rainwater. This is a rain barrel connected to 2 trash cans that I've basically stolen from their original purpose of a trash can and collected extra rainwater. 2 times now I've made compost tea using these trash cans. I use a mesh bag from the beer brewing batch that I had that collects about maybe a gallon worth of compost. And then one time I just put the whole bag in there and let it sit for a couple of days. Another time I did more of a recipe that included molasses, fish fertilizer, and a third product that I can't remember right now. Here's the watering bucket I collect water from, and basically gets my steps in because I'm walking all over the yard watering plants with this. This is a second large rain barrel. I acquired it through the city of Edmond this year. Not sure where this is going to end up. We've talked about leaving it here. This part of the house needs a rain gutter in which to attach it there. Where I've got an existing rain gutter on the other side of the house that this will attach to relatively easy. This here is the largest section of vegetable garden that I've got going. This is my first year to do a garden, and so it's relatively small to scale. I've got quite a few things going on here. I've got some cucamelon vines taken from the little herb garden area over there by the house. I've got some cherry tomatoes in a pot here and in a little repurposed planter here. I've got tomatoes here. I've got peppers here. Got a little onion down there. It's the only one that survived. You can't really see it. I've got some gourds growing here that are just kind of, fun, I guess. And here is a giant cluster of 2 or 3 zucchini plants. Next to that, we've got some peppers, onions, and then about 3 okra plants. This is one of 2 vegetable garden areas that I have in the yard. This is a shaded area, and I've been experimenting with what I'm told are vegetables that will grow well in the shade. Here we've got some kale. This kale is really coming in pretty good. I thinned out and transplanted some just about 5 days ago to this side of the yard, from this side of this square rather. Here I've got some water crest. The rain tends to beat this down pretty bad. I think the combination of that and maybe some need to thin that out. I'm hoping that will just take over and be a beautiful little planter of watercress. This is where I've got some starters of some vines and some flowers that I've just been gradually transplanting. Not having much success transplanting these vines because they're so thin and finicky, but I'll keep experimenting. And then finally on this side of the house, I have some Brussels sprouts. These Brussels sprouts have been a bit of a quandary to me because they're not growing very fast. I'm told they work well, they grow well in the shade, but I'm experimenting a little here with propping some of them up, but hopefully I'll find a way for these things to grow better. Here we've got the herb garden. I've got a mojito mint, sage, basil, and a delicious Greek sage. Right here is a little spot that every year I transplant some red clover into, and usually I just let it grow. This year I've kind of cut it down, harvested or whatever, and put it in the compost pile so that it'll grow up again, and I'll just keep doing that. I've heard you can do like a clover tea or something, but haven't quite looked into that. And then we've got chocolate mint, and right here is a cluster of cucamelon vine, some lavender here, and some rosemary. Got 3 rosemary bushes spread out really by the 3 entrances of the house. This is my potting gardening station and grill. I haven't mowed in a while, so this is going to be challenging to see, but for years we mowed this entire little meadow. A couple of years ago, I stopped mowing the entire area and left this section here and then a section over there to grow. We have, well, until COVID-19, we had a lot of people over pretty regularly here to entertain in the house, and so it still made sense for us to mow this pretty large section of the yard to be a little more play friendly. But this year I have allowed this section under the volleyball court to grow as well. That's been unmowed. I planted some wildflowers on these 2 sections that I've allowed to grow for a couple of years. They were blooming really nicely until that dry spell hit about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and since then a lot of these blooms have not been quite as strong, but you can still see a couple of flowers in there. It really wasn't that thick to begin with. I didn't seed a whole lot really, so this is really kind of the start of the planting of wildflowers in my yard. The mixture was not necessarily a native mixture. I would love to shift to more of a native wildflower mixture here. I would also like to shift to, in this area and perhaps even into this larger yard area, to more of a native grass. This is the other side of the yard that has been largely untouched for a couple of years now, although I did mow this on the highest level at the end of the season last year and then spread some wildflower on it as well, kind of as an experiment to see which side of the yard did better. The results are uncertain. This definitely is a thicker grass on this side of the yard, so there's that. This little molehill is a good spot to talk about how I'm hoping this yard can become truly a regenerative experiment or habitat for animals. Not a fan of moles, and I've heard that a couple of predators that take care of moles tend to live in trees, And so I'm hoping right here is a cedar that I'm cutting down, but I'm leaving a good part of the trunk to build a box with the goal of drawing in either an owl or a hawk to nest there. But regardless, from what I understand, the habitat that we have back here is in general more friendly to rodents, which in and of itself brings in hawks more frequently, perhaps owls. But I'm trying to draw in these friends to make this place their home. Just so happened to catch one in action here. Let's see if he comes up. This is a good spot to talk about the removal of invasive species. This is something I'm just learning about. I've known for years though that cedars are invasive. They're stingy about keeping and drawing the water to themselves, and they grow up into these trees and end up killing off what can be some really beautiful oaks. This is a great example of, I think, where things were headed. I have taken out these cedars. As you can see, there's a stack of relatively small cedar trees that I've cut down, and I'm planning to let these dry out and perhaps build something with it. And then I will send this pile along with several other piles of similar projects through a mulcher or a wood chipper to create mulch for hopefully for various uses in the yard. So we'll stay in this area here to talk about native species as well. These oaks, I've tried to work to pull out the vines out of, and of course take the cedars out from under them, and other invasive trees such as mulberry trees. In the process, I've discovered these dogwood trees that grow underneath these larger oaks and other trees, which I understand to be native trees, but they're a beautiful flowering tree that don't get very large and create a great underbrush. I've also learned that redwood trees, while they're the state tree, they're not really that hardy, and they don't get very strong or healthy. But I've worked to preserve them in this yard nonetheless, and am open to ways to make them more healthy. I talk a little bit here about use of rain and the hope to try to diversify ecosystems. This here is a little water bucket pond plastic container that I am hoping to catch rainwater in. We are catching rainwater in, but the rock that I've got here is not quite working out. The water's really kind of washing it out, so I've got to find a solution for the flow of water. But eventually I want to catch the rainwater there and just have a little water habitat, maybe even have a little waterfall down to a second level underneath there. This is admittedly on the side of our entire yard, so it's really away from everything else that's going on in the yard. We do have a lot of ideas about this area of making it a full-on vegetable garden, and or putting in an above ground swimming pool kind of up more on the hill. You can't really tell, but there's a hill coming up, so putting it into the hill, or a full-on pond, as compared to the little water tank I've got on the side of the yard. having more of a pond right here in the middle of the yard. Right here we've got a pretty large rock pile. These are rocks that were taken off of the back of the house from an addition to the house 25, 30 years ago. This here is a little cluster of morning glory. I built this trellis in the hopes that this morning glory will just take over the trellis. I have been experimenting this year with seedlings, and this is a little area for the first time that I've tried to grow some flowers. Usually I'll put some annuals here, but this year they're finally starting to get a little bigger to bloom. This is a butterfly. Oh, hey Sandy. Some sort of a butterfly flower, and then I've transplanted gradually this little flower here that I'm growing in the backyard, and just kind of tried to gradually transplant them up here in ways that I feel like will keep their life going. But we'll see. As you can see, I've got some compost, a little bit of avocado in that compost that hasn't quite broken down, but anyway, and then a little hosta on the end. This cluster of lavender I think is about 4 or 5 years old, and about a month ago, for about a month, we had bees feasting on this thing. They've sort of abandoned it, so I guess it's all used up.